Sophia Hartley couldn't accept that Daniel Brooks had moved on, and Thomas Reed had become the man in his life. What started as heartbreak quickly spiraled into obsession, leading Sophia down a path of shocking violence no one in Manchester could have imagined. Please subscribe for daily new update of Crime Story and watch till end. Sophia Hartley had always believed in love, the kind of love that promised stability, warmth, and companionship. When she first met Daniel Brooks, she thought she had found her perfect match. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely attentive to her every need. Their courtship was filled with long walks along the Manchester canals, late-night coffee dates, and endless conversations about dreams and future plans. Sophia imagined a life with him that would be full of laughter, comfort, and a sense of belonging. When they finally married, she felt as though everything in her life had fallen into place. The early years of their marriage were filled with hope. Sophia and Daniel moved into a modest house on the outskirts of the city, painted in soft pastel colors, with a small garden where she planted roses and tulips. At first there was joy in the simple things, the smell of fresh bread in the morning, quiet evenings reading together, and shared weekends exploring the countryside. Sophia believed these moments were proof that love could endure anything. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Daniel had ambitions that often clashed with Sophia's quieter nature. While she dreamed of stability and routine, he chased excitement, career opportunities, and social connections that left her feeling sidelined. Arguments began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. It started with small disagreements about finances and social events, but over time, the discussions became more frequent and harsher. Words that were once tender turned sharp, leaving bruises on her heart. Daniel's dismissive tone and occasional coldness made Sophia feel invisible in her own home. She tried to talk to him, to reconnect, but each attempt seemed to push him further away. Slowly, the love she had once felt began to fade, replaced by frustration, sadness, and a gnawing sense of loneliness. The breaking point came one stormy evening when Daniel returned home late, intoxicated and irritable, after a night out with friends. The conversation turned into a shouting match, and for the first time Sophia felt a deep fear of the person she had once trusted implicitly. That night, she realized that the life she had imagined with Daniel, the happy marriage, the shared dreams, was no longer possible. The following months were filled with tense silence, cold shoulders, and increasingly bitter encounters. Finally, after countless arguments and sleepless nights, they agreed to divorce. The process was messy but quiet. No one wanted a public spectacle, but the emotional damage was already done. Sophia moved to a small, quiet neighborhood in Manchester, hoping the distance would heal the wounds. She redecorated her new apartment, surrounded herself with familiar items, and tried to create a life separate from Daniel's shadow. Friends visited, offering comfort, but deep down, she carried the heavy weight of heartbreak. Each night, she replayed memories of the marriage, some filled with happiness, others with pain. Despite her efforts to move on, the ghost of Daniel's presence lingered. She often found herself wondering if she had failed, if she had somehow been unable to keep love alive. And little did she know, the end of their marriage was only the beginning of a chain of events that would soon spiral into obsession, danger, and tragedy. Months after the divorce, Sophia Hartley was slowly trying to piece her life back together. She focused on work, spent quiet evenings reading, and even joined a small community art class to keep her mind occupied. She told herself that she was moving forward, that the past was behind her. But one morning, a notification on her phone shattered that fragile calm. Daniel Brooks had remarried. The news appeared in her social media feed, accompanied by smiling photos of him holding hands with a man named Thomas Reed. The images showed laughter, closeness, and an undeniable happiness that Sophia had not seen in years. Her chest tightened, and for a moment, she could not breathe. The initial shock was followed by a surge of disbelief. How could he have moved on so quickly, so easily? The man she had once loved, the person she had shared her life with, was now embracing someone else completely. Sophia stared at the photos over and over, examining the smallest details, the way Daniel's hand rested on Thomas's shoulder, the expression of pure joy on his face, the casual intimacy that had once been hers. Each image felt like a punch to her chest, a reminder that the life she had imagined would never exist. The news was everywhere, shared on multiple platforms, accompanied by comments and likes from friends, colleagues, and even strangers. It was as if the entire world had moved on while she remained frozen in time. A mix of emotions began to take hold: anger, confusion, and something darker that she tried not to acknowledge. She couldn't stop thinking about their past, the promises, the shared moments, and the sudden emptiness that had followed their separation. Every memory that had once brought warmth now brought pain. Sophia found herself replaying conversations and interactions in her mind, dissecting each one, wondering what had gone wrong. The jealousy gnawed at her quietly at first, then louder with each passing day. She started imagining the life they had once shared, now replaced by a stranger she had never met. Thomas's presence in Daniel's life felt like a betrayal, even though Sophia knew logically she no longer had a claim on him. Sophia began checking Daniel's social media obsessively, following every post, every story, every tagged photo. She memorized their routines, learned which cafes they frequented, and even noted the quiet streets they walked together. Her friends noticed the change in her demeanor. Once cheerful and sociable, she became withdrawn, tense, and distant. She refused invitations, avoided conversations, and spent hours alone scrolling through the photos that had upended her sense of normalcy. Each new update sent waves of pain through her, and yet she could not look away. What started as shock had now evolved into an unhealthy fixation. Sophia tried to convince herself she was merely curious, that she was just keeping track of someone she had once loved. But deep down, she knew it was more. Thoughts of Daniel and Thomas began to dominate her waking hours. Sleep became restless, and meals were forgotten. Every detail of their new life together played in her mind like a film she could not pause or stop. Sophia was caught in a spiral, unaware that the quiet obsession growing inside her would soon push her toward choices she could never reverse, choices that would shatter lives in ways she could not yet imagine. Sophia Hartley's thoughts were no longer her own. Every waking moment seemed to revolve around Daniel Brooks and his new life with Thomas Reed. She found herself imagining their conversations, their laughter, even the way they looked at each other in public. It was an obsession that she could not control, a shadow that followed her everywhere. She told herself she was simply curious, that she was only trying to understand how someone she had once loved could so easily replace her. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her feelings had turned into something dangerous, something that no amount of reasoning could stop. At first, it was small things. Sophia would glance at her phone repeatedly, scrolling through social media feeds to check if there were new photos or updates. She memorized the cafes they visited, the quiet streets they walked along, and even the schedule of Daniel's office. She began driving past the neighborhoods where she knew Daniel and Thomas lived, though she always stayed hidden, careful not to be seen. Every detail became a piece of a puzzle she felt compelled to solve, as if understanding their routine could somehow restore control over the chaos in her mind. Friends noticed the changes immediately. Sophia, who had once been outgoing and lively, became distant, tense, and restless. Invitations to social events were refused, conversations were avoided, and she spent hours alone, staring at screens and jotting down notes in small notebooks she carried everywhere. Even her appearance began to reflect the turmoil inside her. Her hair, once neat and cared for, grew untidy. Her eyes, once bright and expressive, now seemed distant, almost hollow. Every gesture, every movement carried the weight of someone constantly consumed by thoughts they could not escape. Sophia's obsession deepened during the quiet hours of the night. While the city slept, she would scroll endlessly through photographs, replay memories of her past with Daniel, and imagine hypothetical scenarios of their lives together. She analyzed every smile, every glance, every shared moment she had once believed was unique. The jealousy and pain were unbearable, but instead of retreating, she clung to it. It was like a fire feeding itself, growing stronger with each thought. Even when she tried to focus on herself, the images and memories intruded. Painting in her art class no longer brought joy. Each brushstroke was overshadowed by images of Daniel and Thomas. Work became mechanical. Conversations with colleagues hollow and forced. Sophia's mind was a battlefield, constantly torn between logic and obsession, reality and imagination. She could no longer differentiate between her own feelings and the imagined happiness of her former husband with someone else. In her heart, Sophia knew something had shifted. The hurt she felt after the divorce had transformed into something much darker. It was no longer simply sadness or loss. It had become a silent, growing fixation, a quiet storm that threatened to break free at any moment. She tried to convince herself that she could handle it, that she could move on without acting on these feelings. But deep down, she was aware that the obsession was building towards something more dangerous. Each day that passed, she felt the pull of a path she could not yet see fully. A path that would eventually lead to a confrontation that none of them could have imagined. Sophia Hartley had reached a point where mere thoughts were no longer enough. Her obsession with Daniel Brooks and his new life with Thomas Reed had consumed her completely, leaving no room for logic or reason. Each day, her mind circled endlessly around their routines, their public appearances, and the smiles that seemed to mock her pain. She began to feel a restless urgency, as if time itself were pushing her toward a decision she could neither resist nor fully comprehend. The anger, jealousy, and heartbreak that had been quietly simmering for months now boiled into something far more dangerous. She started researching everything she could about firearms, trying to understand how they worked, what would be necessary to acquire one, and how to use it effectively. Websites, forums, and guides became her constant companions. Every night she studied ballistics, safety precautions, and the laws surrounding weapons in the UK. Sophia knew she had to be careful. She could not afford to be caught before she had the chance to act. The meticulous research became part of her daily routine, a secret obsession she carried alone, carefully hiding it from anyone who might ask questions. Alongside her research, she studied Daniel's movements even more closely. She knew the streets he walked, the cafes he frequented, and the small park he passed during his morning jogs. Every detail mattered. No matter how insignificant it seemed, Sophia imagined the perfect moment, a brief window where Daniel and Thomas would be alone, vulnerable, and unaware. She mapped the streets in her mind, noting escape routes, hiding places, and the timing of each movement. What had once been idle curiosity had transformed into a calculated obsession. Sophia's friends noticed the intensity in her eyes, the way she seemed always alert, as if listening for something invisible. Her demeanor had shifted completely. She spoke less, smiled less, and even her body language was tense, coiled like a spring ready to snap. She carried notebooks filled with observations, sketches of routes, and reminders of times and locations. She told herself these notes were harmless, just preparation, just planning. But deep down, she knew the thoughts they contained were becoming more than just mental exercises. In quiet moments, Sophia replayed the scenes in her mind with terrifying clarity. She imagined confronting Daniel and Thomas in a secluded street, the shock on their faces, the panic, and the sudden, irreversible consequences. She knew the act would change everything, the lives of all involved, the city around them, even her own future. And yet, instead of fear, there was a strange calmness in her mind, a conviction that this step, however extreme, was somehow justified. Her heartbreak had transformed into a dark resolve, a belief that she could restore a sense of control by taking the situation into her own hands. Days passed, and Sophia continued her preparations silently, moving through life with the outward appearance of normalcy, while inwardly constructing the scenario that would soon define her existence. Each step, each observation, each detail fed the growing intensity of her plan. The quiet, careful woman who had once tried to rebuild her life after divorce was gone. In her place was someone methodical, focused, and ready to act. a person whose obsession had grown into a dangerous purpose. The storm inside Sophia was no longer just thoughts, it was a force waiting to be unleashed, and there was no turning back now. The day had arrived, the day Sophia Hartley had been preparing for in secret for weeks. The city of Manchester was overcast, clouds hanging low, casting gray shadows over the streets. Sophia's hands were clammy, but her mind was unnervingly clear. Every detail of her plan had been rehearsed countless times in her thoughts. She knew the street where Daniel Brooks and Thomas Reed often walked in the afternoons, a quiet, narrow lane that would give her a fleeting moment of opportunity. She waited, hidden in the shadows, heart pounding, yet oddly detached from the fear she might have felt. As she waited, she watched passers-by go about their day, unaware of the drama about to unfold. Children played in the distance, a dog barked, and cars drove slowly past the alley where she crouched. Sophia felt a strange mix of anticipation and calm, a clarity that came from the obsession that had consumed her for months. Every sound, every movement, every shift in the breeze seemed amplified, as if the city itself were holding its breath. She clutched the small firearm in her bag, a tool she had learned to use in secret, and reminded herself that timing was everything. She could not afford mistakes. Then she saw them. Daniel and Thomas appeared at the end of the street, laughing quietly, unaware of the presence lurking nearby. Sophia's pulse quickened. She observed their steps, the way Daniel adjusted his coat, the way Thomas glanced at a shop window. The moment she had imagined for so long was finally arriving. Sophia moved carefully, ensuring she remained unseen, her eyes locked on her former husband. Each step brought her closer, yet she felt an eerie calm, as if she were watching a scene from a movie rather than preparing to act in real life. When Daniel and Thomas reached the narrowest part of the lane, Sophia stepped out. The sound of her movement startled them. Daniel turned, his expression registering shock, while Thomas instinctively moved closer to him. The sudden realization of danger flashed in their eyes, but it was too late. Sophia raised the gun with practiced precision, and a single shot rang out, echoing sharply against the brick walls of the alley. Chaos erupted instantly. Daniel stumbled and fell to the ground, clutching his chest, while Thomas screamed for help, his voice cutting through the street like a knife. Panic spread quickly, and bystanders froze or ran for cover, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. Sophia dropped the gun and stood frozen for a moment, staring at the scene she had brought into existence. Her chest heaved, adrenaline surging, yet a strange sense of relief washed over her. Daniel lay motionless, pain etched across his face, while Thomas frantically tried to stop the bleeding. The street, which had moments ago been quiet and ordinary, had transformed into a scene of horror. The echoes of the shot lingered, carried by the wind, marking a moment that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Sophia knew the authorities would arrive soon, and the reality of what she had done began to seep in. But in that fleeting instant, all that mattered was the culmination of months of obsession and meticulous planning. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the tense air of the Manchester street. Sophia Hartley had anticipated the arrival of the authorities, yet nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of the chaos that followed. Daniel Brooks lay on the cold pavement, his hand pressed desperately against the wound in his chest, while Thomas Reed's frantic screams filled the alley. Passers-by had begun calling emergency services, some crouching in fear, others frozen, unable to look away from the unfolding nightmare. The street, which had been quiet just moments before, had become a maelstrom of panic, confusion, and disbelief. When the police arrived, they moved quickly and decisively. Officers secured the area, directing bystanders away from the scene, while paramedics rushed to Daniel's side, working swiftly to stabilize him. Sophia, still standing nearby, tried to mask her emotions, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. An officer approached cautiously, noting her tense posture and pale face. Within seconds she was handcuffed and led away, her mind a whirlwind of adrenaline and strange calm. The reality of what she had done began to press down on her, but she had rehearsed every possible scenario, every question, every confrontation, and she clung to that sense of preparation like a lifeline. As Daniel was loaded into the ambulance, his face pale and strained with pain, Thomas followed, supporting him as best he could, his own body shaking from shock and fear. The paramedics worked quickly, applying pressure, administering medication, and trying to control the bleeding. Onlookers whispered to one another, some crying, others muttering in disbelief at the sudden eruption of violence. It was a scene that no one in the quiet street would ever forget. A normal afternoon transformed into a nightmare within seconds. Investigators began their work immediately, meticulously documenting the crime scene. They found Sophia's notebooks, filled with detailed observations of Daniel's routines, sketches of streets, and notes that revealed the depth of her fixation. Her online activity was scrutinized, revealing searches and research that painted a clear picture of premeditation. Everything pointed to careful planning, deliberate execution, and a dangerous obsession that had reached its breaking point. The officers and detectives were struck not only by the boldness of her actions, but also by the meticulous nature of her preparation. It was chilling evidence of a mind consumed by obsession, a mind willing to cross the line into irreversible violence. News of the shooting spread quickly through Manchester, making headlines within hours. Friends, family, and neighbors struggled to comprehend how a woman who had seemed so quiet, so controlled, could be capable of such extreme actions. The city buzzed with questions. How had it come to this? Could it have been prevented? The story dominated conversations, social media, and news outlets, each report revealing more about Sophia's planning, her obsession, and the terrifying final act that had left Daniel fighting for his life. In the midst of the chaos, one fact remained clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. Sophia Hartley's trial became the center of attention across Manchester and beyond. The courtroom was packed from day one, reporters and cameras crowding the back rows, capturing every detail for the public. Spectators whispered in anticipation as the prosecution began laying out the case. Evidence of Sophia's meticulous planning filled the room. Her notebooks, the detailed observations of Daniel and Thomas, and records of her online searches. Each piece painted a chilling picture of a mind consumed by obsession, a mind willing to plan and execute a violent act with precision. The air in the courtroom was tense, heavy with the weight of the tragedy that had unfolded. The prosecution described in detail the events of the shooting day. Witnesses recounted the chaotic scene, the panic, the sound of the gunshot, and the fear that had rippled through the street. Photos of the alley, paramedics tending to Daniel, and Sophia's arrest were presented as evidence. Each image, each statement, added to the narrative of premeditated danger. The story of a seemingly ordinary woman transforming into someone capable of such violence captured the attention of everyone present. The tension in the room was palpable, with every attendee silently imagining the moments leading up to the shooting. The defense tried to argue that Sophia's mental state had deteriorated due to heartbreak and obsession, suggesting that she was not fully in control of her actions. Psychologists who examined her testified about the impact of intense emotional trauma, the long-lasting effects of jealousy, and the way obsessive thinking can distort reality. Yet the detailed planning, the hours spent researching, and the methodical execution of the attack made it difficult for the jury to accept a full claim of diminished responsibility. The line between heartbreak and deliberate action had been crossed, and the evidence left little room for doubt. Family members of Daniel and Sophia watched in silent anguish. Thomas Reed appeared visibly shaken, still processing the trauma of witnessing the attack firsthand. Daniel, recovering slowly, was unable to attend every session, but his prior testimony and the evidence of his injuries made the impact of Sophia's actions undeniable. The courtroom drama unfolded like a tense story, each day bringing new revelations, each detail adding weight to the gravity of what had happened. The public followed closely, debates sparking on social media and in homes across the city. People struggled to understand how a personal heartbreak had escalated into something so violent and calculated. After weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and deliberation, the jury faced the monumental task of deciding Sophia's fate. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the courtroom filled with hushed conversations and nervous glances. When the verdict was finally read, the impact was immediate. Sophia Hartley was found guilty of attempted murder, the culmination of months of obsession, planning and violence. Gasps echoed through the room, and the press erupted with coverage, analyzing every aspect of the case. For Sophia, the trial had ended, but the consequences of her actions would stretch far beyond the walls of the courtroom, leaving scars on all those involved and a lasting reminder of how obsession can escalate into tragedy. After the verdict, life changed completely for everyone involved. Sophia Hartley was taken to a high-security prison, her freedom replaced with bars, routines, and the harsh reality of her actions. The quiet streets she had once wandered, the cafes she had watched from afar, and the city she had roamed so freely were now just distant memories. Each day in prison reminded her that the path she had chosen was irreversible. She had meticulously planned the shooting, convinced that it would give her a sense of control, but now that control had been stripped away, leaving her alone with the consequences. Daniel Brooks survived the attack, but the physical and emotional scars remained. Every movement reminded him of that afternoon, the sudden pain, the shock, and the fear of losing his life. Recovery was slow and painful, and even after months, he found himself haunted by the memory of Sophia's eyes as she raised the gun. Simple tasks, like walking down the street or returning to his daily routine, were filled with anxiety. Thomas Reed, who had witnessed the shooting firsthand, carried his own trauma. He struggled with nightmares, sudden panic, and a lingering fear of public spaces. Their lives, which had once seemed full of hope and happiness, had been permanently altered in an instant. Friends and neighbors could not forget the incident either. Conversations in the neighborhood often returned to that day, the shooting becoming a cautionary tale about obsession, jealousy, and heartbreak gone wrong. Social media was filled with reflections, theories, and speculation, as people tried to understand how a woman who had seemed so quiet and normal could plan such a violent act. Sophia's name became infamous, and the story traveled beyond Manchester, serving as a grim reminder of how quickly life could change. In prison, Sophia reflected on the choices that had led her here. She thought of the months of obsession, late nights spent planning, and the countless moments she had imagined Daniel and Thomas together. In those quiet hours, she began to confront the magnitude of what she had done. The brief sense of control she had felt that day in the alley had been an illusion. Now, surrounded by walls and barred windows, she faced the reality that her actions had destroyed more than just her own life. They had inflicted lasting trauma on Daniel, Thomas, and everyone who had been caught in the aftermath. For Daniel and Thomas, moving forward became a slow, deliberate process. Therapy, support from friends, and time helped them regain a sense of safety. But the memory of that day would never fully fade. They learned to navigate life with caution, aware that a moment of violence could erupt when least expected. And though Sophia's imprisonment brought legal closure, it could never undo the emotional wounds or the fear that lingered. The story of Sophia Hartley, Daniel Brooks, and Thomas Reed became a permanent chapter in the history of Manchester's crime. It was a tale of obsession, heartbreak, and the devastating consequences when emotions spiral out of control. In the years that followed, the city remembered the shooting not just as a criminal act, but as a warning, a reminder that unchecked obsession, left to fester, can turn ordinary lives into tragedy. The alley where it all happened remained silent, a stark monument to a day that none of the survivors would ever forget.